right. Well, everything happens automatically on StreamYard. Very entertaining. How are you, Michael?
Oh, good to see you again, Peter. Thanks for having me back. And, this little experimentation on the streaming thing.
Yeah, for people who have joined us, welcome. This is the Global Gambit live. I'm wearing floral shirt. This is our first live stream between myself and Michael Rossi, who is a professor at Rutgers University, but teaches in Uzbekistan, specifically the capital Tashkent, and knows very much in his own words, the post-Soviet, post-communist states. And we thought it'd be interesting. Michael's joined the show before. And if you're not familiar with me, I do a lot of podcasting, be that here on X or here on YouTube, because we are streaming live to both platforms as well. But Michael has joined the show before, and we've talked about, I think the most notable one was the reaction to Prigozhin, Yevgeny Prigozhin, and his kicking of the bucket around about this time last year in that crash, which I think we can both agree was, most of us can agree was a removal, a purge by Vladimir Putin. But it's Vladimir Putin that we're going to be discussing a little bit here, specifically in the context of the United States of America land. What's better than a Brit talking about American politics with a fellow American who doesn't even live in America at the moment? I'm being facetious.
No. I'm here. I'm in the States.
Oh, you're in America at the moment. Okay,
I am in the States. Yes. This is a photo. This is not a window outside. So this is a photo of Samarkand. So I'm not.
There you go.
I'm in the U.S. right now. Yes.
But yeah, Michael is a professor who teaches abroad, but at an American institution. And we thought it'd be interesting to sort of have a look at the American chaos, I think is no other term really for it, in the United States, but from the perspective of the Russian, the Kremlin, Putin perspective. Obviously, there are many different challenges the United States is facing, but Russia is one of the systemic ones. And you can argue whether China is the overarching main strategical rival of the United States, but Russia is certainly one that can't be ignored. And sort of some people see Russia as the reckless power that is flinging its toys out of the pram. This is very much a Western perception, a Western academic interpretation, not necessarily the one that we both hold. But the Western perspective is Russia is the reckless power which is trying to make itself relevant and disruptive, but China is the systemic challenge that the United States needs to focus on more long term. But that being said, America is still, we've had some Russian interferences in American elections and generally just interferences, and we thought it'd be worth having a brief conversation for the next 30-40 minutes. So if you enjoy the content, do drop your opinion. Do check out Michael's channel, my channel, if you resonate with what we're saying or not. Neither of us have echo chambers, and we welcome disagreements as much as support. But Michael, I don't know. I mean, where to start, really? The past month, 2 weeks, absolutely insane. Not only do we have the first attempted assassination on a living president, former president, presidential nominee, but we've also had a incumbent president stand down or not going to run again. And he is, he's going to be one of, like Trump, potentially, of only one-term presidents, which up until Trump had not, I think, been the case in American history. So I don't know, you're in America, but you spend a lot of time in Russian-influenced parts of the world. How are you seeing this at the moment?
Well, I mean, as an American, you're absolutely right. I mean, this has just been a roller coaster over the past 2-3 weeks or so. Just speaking from the point of view of the United States, up until Biden's much anticipated announcement that he is stepping down, and most of us will understand that his decision to step down was not voluntarily, and he was forced out. Democratic Party jugglers behind the scenes had effectively threatened to withhold large amounts of funding for the campaign. So, Biden was kind of pushed aside. He was literally brought in 4 years ago, and they, moved him out. As far as Russia is concerned with this, interestingly enough, Russia's been kind of quiet. Questions have arisen to Putin, Lavrov, Maria Zakharova, who is the main spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and all of them have said This is an internal affair as far as the United States is concerned. Russia will work with whoever is elected if they want to work with Russia. About earlier in the year, I forget. I'm not exactly sure exactly when. It was following the Tucker Carlson interview with Putin.
Oh yes, lovely.
Which it's really the first time that many Americans kind of got a real front row seat into the narrative that Russia views with this conflict, right? So you had said just beforehand how there's a Western perception of Russian interference with U.S. elections. That may not necessarily be our views, but it's the narrative that is. And now following that interview, there was a short follow-up interview with Pavel Zarubin, who is one of the main journalists in Russia, usually has front row access to Putin. And he asked this question. He says to Putin, which of the two presidents would you support? Would you support Biden or Trump? And immediately, Putin, without missing a beat, said Biden. Almost took Zarubin by surprise, saying, "No, absolutely, Biden." And in a way, Putin is very much the very calm, the calculated. He rarely gets like visibly angry, and he said, "No, easily Biden." Because he's much more experienced, he's much more of a professional statesman, and he's much more predictable. Which, as far as the United States is concerned, right, the prevailing narrative, especially among the MSNBC crowd, is that Putin and Trump are, best of friends, that Trump is Putin's puppet and is his mole inside the United States. It's a narrative. It's a narrative that is really, really hard for certain people of the professional, and I even have to say tenured managerial class to not believe in. I don't know why they do, but they do. And then recently, with the announcement that Biden would step down, which I also have to emphasize, it was predicted on almost all the Telegram channels that I'm following. I think it was all but certain following.
Are you the mole? You're the mole. You're on all the Telegram channels. It's not Trump's that's the mole. You're the mole because you're on all the Telegram channels. No, I mean, jokes aside, though, there's 150 people watching, so it's out in the open now, everybody. But,
it's read. I read. I don't post. I have my own Telegram. I communicate with my colleagues and my students on Telegram, but no, I read. I don't post.
Okay,
but it was all. But
at this point, I want to just but I want to add something on this, which is that I think it's worth noting that it's too simplistic, I think, to frame it as that Trump is Putin's puppet, right? I understand the framing that people I'm not exactly a Putin supporter, but like people who are opposed to Putin call him the puppet, but it's more nuanced than that. I mean, I don't think Trump's the most intellectually savvy chap, but I don't think he'd be as idiotic as to suddenly literally be at the, sort of being controlled by Putin. And I also just don't think Putin carries as much that far influence as we like to think, right? We've seen how his interferences into the Ukraine war and front lines, at least on a tactical level, have actually been a hindrance more than a benefit. And I think it's too much of a sort of get out, sort of safe cause to say that Putin is controlling Trump head on. I do want to ask you one specific thing before you shift over to more broadly what you were saying, though, which is, for me, Trump is certainly done some unexpected things during his first term. The Abraham Accords were pretty impressive. I don't think we can deny that. Whether or not you consider that was because of his own skill or because of his team or the willingness of the Arab states or some of the Arab states to get behind it is another matter. But I think he did achieve certain things. And the main argument I think I hear from people who are more conservative or support the Republican Party, or more specifically MAGA Republicans, is that, there was no major conflict. The Americans were on. No one wanted to take on Trump in that period. And as soon as Biden comes into office, because he's softer or more moderate or whatever you want to say, people are like, oh, he's useless. But he is the most experienced statesman in the United States history. Like, he's the most, and that's why I have rather curious thoughts about Kamala. I'm not. We'll talk about that later on. But like, you know, he's been there, giving her experience and building up her appreciation for foreign policy. Again, this isn't necessarily a defense of Biden. It's just I do find it interesting that MAGA Republicans say that about Trump, but I don't think it's as simple as that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what I'm spitballing here.
Yeah, I know.
But I want these points into the conversation.
Yeah, there's been not even among the Republicans, or specifically even the MAGA Republicans, although that is part of the narrative too, is that yes, under the Trump presidency, it was comparatively speaking the most peaceful that we've had in comparison to the Obama years, the Bush Jr. years, and it could be for a couple of things. I mean, I certainly wouldn't chalk it up to his diplomatic acumen. He was given significant amount of criticism by many people, specifically within the Democratic Party, but even among some of the more non-Trumpy Republicans for going to North Korea and, you know, having the audacity of meeting with Kim Jong-un. I'm no fan of Trump, but I got to say that for me was far more impressive than the Abraham Accords. You know, the Abraham Accords, in addition to getting a number of Arab countries to normalize relations with Israel, I mean, he also was the one that moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He also recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel. I mean, this is just a major, major breach in what was previously more neutral policy as far as the United States is concerned. And I have absolutely no.
But you agree with his choice of moving the embassy?
No, absolutely not. Oh,
you
absolutely. No, absolutely not. I mean,
I can support him on the Abraham Accords. I think that's a good step forward in trying to somehow reach strategical balance in the Middle East. But
most of that was, I think, most of that has been upended now as a result of nearly a year of call it whatever you want. I mean, at this point, it's just a series of war crimes that have been, you know, happening. But I think at this point, let's say if Trump was to get reelected, and we have to be, you know, realistic about this, is that his chances of getting reelected are quite high. I don't think that they are as high now as they were prior to Biden announcing he would be stepping down.
I mean, that's only 4 days ago, to keep it in context, right?
I mean, it was.
It's not like it's a couple months ago. 3 months ago, we had Biden winning all the primaries. You know, it's insane how quickly things have changed. Anyway,
well, he wins all the primaries. Well, he wins all the primaries because he wasn't even remotely challenged. The Democratic Party had basically said, Biden's our guy. He is as sharp as a tack. He's ready to rock and roll, you know, and, you know, look, I've been in the teaching business now for a long time. And, you know, one of the life lessons I tell my students is that, listen, if you're going to cheat and lie, cheat and lie convincingly. At least give me that. The Democratic Party is one of the worst that I've ever seen in terms of gaslighting. Because knowing, well, first of all, the debates were a disaster for Biden. They were just an absolute disaster. Then you have the assassination attempt, which, you know, my own cynical self was like, that's it, Trump got it. I mean, that's it. I mean, he's now considered to be, you know, divinely protected. It happened in Pennsylvania, a swing state. His VP choice is from Ohio, another swing state. I mean, it was just all but certain, which forces the Democratic jugglers to push Biden out. And of course, we bring, you know, Kamala Harris in, who, you know, we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes here. We're sort of jumping around. I was actually want to go back to something I was talking about beforehand as far as Trump's foreign policy, right? I mean, you have North Korea, which I thought was rather strategic, but he got a lot of flack for physically engaging with and almost like legitimizing the authority of Kim Jong-un. You know, the man is in charge of North Korea. He's going to be for the foreseeable future. But let's just say that Trump is going to get reelected again this November, knowing now the dynamics that have changed in the Middle East. My guess is that he's going to be much more proactive. He is much more willing to work with Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu knows that if he's got Trump, he's got an ace in the hole as far as the United States is concerned. Trump may, according to, you know, the Telegram radio chatter, try to push for a ceasefire, try to end the conflict in Ukraine. I don't think that that's going to happen, but he has been very vocal, along with his major supporters, by saying, end the war in Ukraine, but most likely redouble efforts in finishing the job in Gaza, which is just going to amount to, if not the full-on ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, their reduction to some innocuous ethnographic oddity without any real power. So I don't think that Trump himself is somehow prone towards no military engagement. I think it was just more, at the time, the United States was disengaging from parts of the world, but you did not have the flare-ups that you had. The invasion of Ukraine was in 2022. The situation in Gaza, and we also have to consider the West Bank, started last year. What would have happened if Trump had gotten reelected and was just finishing out his second term right now? Would things have been the same in terms of Ukraine and Gaza? Would they have been worse? We don't know. So, I'm not one to say that Trump is, far from being the pacifist. Harris, on the other hand, is somebody who up until recently was, I have to say, little more than the committee-appointed diversity hire.
Before we move on to Harris, though, I want to add a couple of points because I'm curious to hear your breakdown, but I think it's worth just mulling over what you said for a minute, because there's a couple of things here. I mean, I'm going to say it now live to how many of you there are. I am always in the middle of most issues, and this includes what we've seen in the past 24 hours in Washington. I think the burning of the US flag is unbelievable and should not be allowed to be. You should not see the Palestinian flag replacing the United States flag. But equally, I don't think Bibi Netanyahu should have been allowed to speak to Congress. I think that's outrageous. To be honest with you, I think the current government is abhorrent. And if we thought Netanyahu was right-wing, some of the people that he's gotten into bed with, Ben Gvir particularly, is just, these are not good people, guys. Yeah. So whether that makes you uncomfortable or not, but people have been asking for me for my reactions to events in the past 24 hours. There's a couple. I also wanted to bring a couple of people in the chat. Thank you, Cheryl. It's nice to meet you. Pradra, I agree. The primaries do reflect badly on the Democratic Party. RJ has a good point about North Korea. What really changed there under Trump? I think it's pretty. I don't think things are changing there. But yeah, I think when it comes to Trump more broadly, Michael, I agree with you. The idea that we can get some kind of peace deal in Ukraine is absurd, mainly because they sort of, yes, the Americans are supplying the Ukrainians. Yes, NATO is supporting them, but the Ukrainians are still a free enacting party in this. And this isn't a sort of defense that suddenly Russia won't overwhelm Ukraine. This is a separate point. The point is the Ukrainians would still fight. Whether or not you think that's a good thing, you can't forcibly make a separate population of people who have ties to the land and history there do what you want from Washington. That's just not how it works. So those are not the same point. They're two separate points, very heavily interlinked, guys. But yeah, I mean, I just want a little bit more of your opinion about JD Vance, to be honest, Michael. We're focusing on the GOP and the Republicans at the moment, and then guys, we're going to shift to Harris and her sort of ticket in a minute. I thought Josh Shapiro might have the likeliest pick, but there's also this former astronaut, the gentleman, I always forget his name. But what do you think of JD Vance? He seems to be another fellow isolationist, heavily about protecting American industries, which is again different from being isolationist. You can be protectionist, which I kind of actually somehow agree with, depending on certain industries and context. But isolationism is just not a thing. You can't be an autarkic state. You can't operate in isolation. This isn't, to bring it in again, North Korea, right? You don't want America to be North Korea, and it's just not realistic. So what's your opinion on JD Vance and the sort of community, if you want to build it, the administration Trump is building around him?
Well, I mean, what is apparent is that Trump is working to reshape the Republican Party around him. And there are many Republicans that are willing to do that because they see that this is an opportunistic way forward. Vance is, not Mike Pence, who was far more of, let's say, an independent Republican with his own support base. And obviously, Trump and Pence have parted ways. And it was no surprise that he would not be vetted for VP. J.D. Vance, young, kind of, certainly he says a lot of interesting things that, I think hurts the Trump campaign more than benefits. What was it? The motherless cat ladies or whatever it is, or I forget what it was that he had said, about people who support the Democratic Party. He's almost giving like second wind to a party that was just about to be KO'd. But he's from Ohio, which is important because Ohio is a swing state. And if Vance can deliver Ohio to Trump, especially with his sort of pro-American industry. Yeah, I agree with you. The isolationism is not really the case. It's sort of a term now that we have to be very careful with because it's more of a protectionist. It's more like a
hardcore,
industrial populist, something like that, right? Populism starts out on the left about 100 or so years ago, but it is very successfully picked up by the right, the populist right. Particularly when it involves an ethnocentric us versus them. So Vance is all in favor of building the wall and making it increasingly difficult for the illegals to come in. I think that Vance is also somebody who is willing to ride the Trump train and use that for his own future political benefit as well. Trump is not going to have somebody that will upstage him, that will rival him. Pence, say what you want about him. Pence was an arch conservative. There's no question about that. But Pence was
a conventional conservative. He wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. But he was somebody that was.
Go ahead.
Yeah, he was somebody that was independently respected within the Republican Party, right? He had his own autonomy. Vance is somebody who certainly has his following, I suppose, but he's much more willing to be a sidekick to the Trump phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading an interesting article in The Economist a few days ago. Yes, guys, I read The Economist occasionally. I'm clearly a globalist elite. World Economic Forum. Yeah,
British elite. You're reading the Bible of neoliberalism.
No, to be honest with you, that's a whole separate conversation we could have, guys. And I do appreciate. I do read all your comments, by the way, guys. I'm Cheryl. I see you. Chris, I see you. RJ, I see you. AY, I see you too. But there's a difference between being a globalist and working for an institution that has global reach, right? You don't necessarily agree with everything that the company organization does. And I think people always need to remember geopolitics and anything is very nuanced. It's not black and white, no matter what people like to say and try and simplify. But anyway, I was reading The Economist and they were talking about that Vance may well be sort of the new face of the MAGA movement, because if Trump does win office, he can't run again after that. Well, unless he does one of what the Democrats calls dictatorial move sets, right? But anyway, or Project 2025, right? We're not going to go into that, but that's the whole point. People think the Democrats, the left of the spectrum, argue that he wants to do this thing. He says he doesn't. But anyway, people are saying that JD Vance may be sort of the new face, the next gen of leaders who are coming in, who sort of take over that evangelical Christian approach to governing the Republican Party, which is obviously different to people like Mitt Romney and more, sort of, we say, center-right, or even Pence, right? I know he's a traditional conservative, but he's not a MAGA conservative in that way anymore. He's distanced himself. There's a lot of factions within the Republican Party. I think we should be clear on that. But anything else to add, or should we move to the Democrats?
That's really, let's talk about the big one, and that is the new heir apparent of the Democratic Party.
Well, I've got lots to say, but I know you do too. So, ladies first.
Then we better wait for the comments.
Okay. Go ahead. What do we make of firstly Harris and her time as VP? And where do you think that she could potentially face some challenges?
I think that it's the most logical and the most predicted choice. And in a way, Harris is perfect. She's absolutely perfect for a job that is ultimately a placeholder for powers and interests behind the scenes. As VP, Kamala Harris had the distinct notoriety of being even less popular than Biden. Her internal staff was constantly resigning. People just didn't know what to make of her. People constantly made fun of Biden for not knowing what he was saying in front of a camera. But then you've got Harris's own brand of word salad, which you're just like, is this doctor? Is this Alton? Like, what in all of God's name are you talking about here? So the fact that she was picked, I mean, first of all, you can just simply say, well, you're VP, right? The current one steps down, the VP steps in. Even though again, I could be wrong, but I really don't know what she did as VP besides, provide entertainment with word salad videos. But she's perfect for the job because she has no real independent agency of her own. And she is somebody that the Democratic Party basically sees as Biden's replacement, except she's got two things going for her as far as identity politics. She's female and she is a person of color. So it shows the Democratic Party is embracing diversity. That's why, I've said she was basically the chosen diversity hire to counter that of Biden being sort of like, the old guard, white crotchety Democrat. She is going to take orders from behind the scenes. She is going to be groomed and presented as the new face of the Democratic Party because, look, Democratic Party loves playing identity politics, and for them, you are either it's a woman, person of color versus Donald Trump, like the Wish.com version of Harvey Weinstein. So it makes it very, very clear. You've got, Trump, who is trying to mold an existing political party around his own narcissistic ego, or you've got Kamala, who is sort of the shell upon which the party can infuse all of its means-tested views and objectives. I don't expect any major changes. I could be wrong. Right now, a big thing is going to be when she meets Netanyahu, and B, what is discussed. Because she said that, she wasn't going to meet with him when he came and spoke to Congress, right? And certain people were not there. What she says right now is going to really set the first image for how she will either be on her own as a candidate or how the Democratic Party is going to shape her as a candidate. Certainly, they will not deviate from the Israel has a right to defend itself. What about Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas narrative? But there are signs that she is certainly no friend of Netanyahu and is certainly, she cannot just simply condone what is happening. So, it's too early in the game to see. Some of the polls already that I've looked at online have suggested that there's really no major change between approval ratings between Biden and Harris. Although, again, it's still early enough where things can change. And this is especially true if Harris is given the right things to say, Vance or Trump say something more, scathing. Trump had his whole narrative set out for Biden, and it worked. Harris is a different story. And the Democratic Party has decided that this is going to be their chosen one, and they will protect, defend, uphold, support like there is, no tomorrow. So Indeed. It's an interesting but very logical choice for the Democratic Party today.
Yeah, so a couple of things here. I do want to come to Putin's perception of all of this, but particularly, obviously, now that we've shifted slightly, I think we know a little bit more how he feels about Trump and Biden. So it'd be nice to think about this woman, potential female leadership, because she covers so many, ticking of boxes. If you want, first potentially India or first woman, non-white purely, a lot of new milestones achieved in US presidential leadership. But I would say, actually, guys, that I'm testing out the thing here. I don't show these tips as screen. Okay, exciting. Oh, goody, I can. Yeah, I'm showing my screen. But as you can see here, I did make a video of how a Kamala Harris presidency could potentially change the US's approach to foreign policy. And I focused on the US, in the Middle East, and I also focused on Russia, Ukraine, but also a little bit of China. So if you want to check it out, you can check out the channel. I highly encourage you to do so. You don't have to subscribe. Well, you can subscribe. It'd be nice. Always love to have new members joining the community. But I would also check out Michael's as well, which is a fantastic. Well, he does a lot of should we say, editing of basically taking speeches. He takes the full speech, or I don't know, address, maybe not a full speech, and breaks it down. So this is 120 minutes, and he directly translates word for word the speeches, and he rightly deserves some of the ones that he got, such as doing the infamous Putin speech when the war in Ukraine, full-scale war, began. So if you want to understand basically what the Russian leaders, Russian elites are saying, then it's worth checking out Michael, because he does a fantastic job of genuinely, not doing a Western interpretation, but a genuine word for word in English. And he does know the region quite well. But anyway, that aside, Michael. So yeah, for me personally, I think Kamala is going to be softer on the Middle East. Not necessarily like she's not going to support Israel, but I think she's going to be a lot more pushing for some kind of sustainable, at least temporary ceasefire. I do think that she's going to push for Ukraine in relatively, I think it's going to be exactly the same as Biden, to be honest with you. But what I do wonder, and this is where I come in for your question or your thoughts, is the reaction of Putin and strongmen who will be dealing potentially with a female president. They'll probably, not that we're going to see the US leadership and Russian leadership meeting anytime soon, but do you think they're going to be even more dismissive just because she is a woman? Again, this is all on the presumption that she is the Democratic nominee. Right. There isn't a leadership contest. I think it's pretty set in stone now. But, how are you feeling about this from the Russian side? And do you think it will be a detriment, a advantage, or a nothing burger for Putin's options on the battlefield?
I think it's largely going to be more of the same. I don't think that there's going to be any major change. It all depends on who we're talking about within the Russian leadership. Putin is a very he's hard to read. And as I said before, his response is, we'll work with any U.S. president who wants to work with us. So we don't really care if it's Biden or Trump or Harris or anybody for that matter. Lavrov, same thing. Lavrov will add that he hopes that the new leadership, he hopes that the new U.S. leadership recognizes their true role in the world, and that is a key part of a multipolar world in which the United States needs to recognize where its influence exists and where it ends, and be more pragmatic over things like Ukraine, Iran, China, North Korea, and such. It's a nice statement that usually is given at the end of a press conference to make it look like the ball is in, America's court. And then you have more, I would say, visceral responses, reactions from Dmitry Peskov and everybody's favorite, Twitter celebrity, Dmitry Medvedev.
Medvedev, yes, Dmitry Medvedev. How much? he had to have to drink today, do we
But
reckon?
I mean, Medvedev has no power. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. I think if we were to, let's say, take the current Russian leadership and convert it into like a deck of playing cards, I mean, Medvedev is the Joker. I think he's just around I think he's around just largely for entertainment purposes. And it's
I think so too.
I think a couple of months ago, somebody on my YouTube channel actually wrote to me and said, "Hey, Medvedev gave this really interesting press conference. Would you mind translating it?" And I said, "Oh God, I don't really want to do Medvedev, but you know what? All right, someone asks. Far be it from me to say that I don't respond to my viewers." And it ended up getting quite. I was like, "Damn, this is good." No, but I mean, in all seriousness, I think that
Michael, there can be no serious with Medvedev, so
no,
you
you
might
can't.
as well just.
No.
I'm
moving it back into the realm of larger analytical discussion here.
But look at this guy. I mean, just look at these for a second, right? The way he says it. I mean, it's not even. I get it. You're opposed to Western imposition of sanctions. You're opposed to NATO expansionism, but I don't know. There's a level right here, and I have to be honest. Of any person that has, I mean, he looks terrible there. To be honest, he does look like quite a big alcoholic. Jokes aside, and I do wonder, like, what is going on in his head. But go on, in all seriousness.
Well, I mean, listen, if he wants to absolutely insult mediocre nothings like Ursula von der Leyen or Josep Borrell, by all means, go ahead. I mean, these individuals, they fail upwards. That's why they're in Brussels as opposed to their own national capitals. But okay, assuming that Harris wins. All right, assuming that she wins, and she could still win, right? She very well could still win this. Her relations with Russia are largely going to be determined by what her handlers behind the scenes tell her to do. I don't give her really any real independent autonomy in shaping U.S. foreign policy. She just doesn't have it. Again, I could be completely wrong, but just based on how she got to where she is right now, right? You got to remember that this is somebody that ran for the presidency in 2020, didn't get a single delegate in any of the primaries, and canceled, ended her race after the first debates when what was her name, Tulsi Gabbard, just kind of, at least that's what people say, just kind of upended her entire rationale. But she was chosen as VP, more so for the visuals and the box checking than anything else. So if she wins, right now it seems much more likely that her foreign policy is going to be largely driven and controlled by power handlers within the State Department, the Pentagon, and other elements. So knowing that, her would-be relationship with Russia, and more specifically with Putin, will probably remain very standoffish. They probably will not meet, especially now that Russia is persona non grata in the West. There is very little contact outside of Lavrov coming to the United Nations. So I don't foresee a Russian-U.S. summit. Unless something completely unforeseen happens, I don't think that there will be any push for a ceasefire. It'll be even less likely than under a Trump presidency. The proxy war will continue. Ukraine will, be given, enough money and ammunition to, survive for the next 2 weeks, and just, keep that going, which necessitate or legitimizes NATO's rhetoric for expansion, for improvement of armaments, and for fortification of the eastern flank of Europe with Russia. China, on the other hand, it's the quiet one, right? And we began this conversation by saying, is Russia or China the bigger rival, the bigger antagonizer to the United States? I mean, long-term China, short-term Russia is the most vocal. China is very quiet in its foreign policy, unless Taiwan comes into the fray. But we also have to note this. China is working very quietly behind the scenes and mending fences with previously disparate rivals. So within the last year, China successfully negotiated a mutual recognition between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We got the two sides working together. And there is just finished right now a meeting in Beijing with members of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Fatah, and Hamas, creating what is effectively a memorandum of unity. Netanyahu is giving his, Reichspartei speech in Congress, and China has negotiated I guess, what is, if nothing else, a symbolic unity of Palestinian leadership, which means that China is becoming more and more of a player outside of its own sphere. But they don't have the same rhetoric, and they don't have the same ideological counterbalance to the United States that Russia seems to be taking the lead in doing, right? So when it comes to Lavrov, when it comes to Putin, but more so Lavrov, right, they are emphasizing the narrative of a new multipolar world in which the West no longer enjoys liberal hegemony. It's not that the West, the United States in particular, is unwelcome in this new multipolar world, but they need to recognize that they have a seat at a proverbial table that others are also seated at. The Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, the Iranians, maybe even the Nigeria, whoever it happens to be. And that's the narrative that Russia and that is the one that Russia seems to be vocally using as a counterbalance to that of the United States. China just seems to be riding that without any real opposition, without any real objection. They're not really adding anything to that, but it almost seems like Russia and China are working in unison within this ideology.
Yeah. So as we begin to wrap up, I think for this session, guys, I'm actually doing this during my lunch break, so I need to go back to work, and Michael has to go off and, well, I think be a more productive member of society. Yeah, a few points. Number one, I think you underestimate Kamala's ability to debate. She was a prosecutor, keep in mind, and not necessarily saying it's exactly the same context, but I don't agree with you, to be honest, Michael. You're framing that it's all about purely what her superiors say behind the scenes. Is she the front of a broader machine of Democrats that are working to, Obama's carryover policies by Biden is obviously that, but I was very surprised, quite impressed, I have to be honest, reading into some of the people if you want a bit more detail of this, check out the video I made. But some of the advisors that she's had around her, one of them is a serious NATO experienced diplomat or just individual. They know she's got some good people around her. And I think because she's coming from a position of having to deal with being, overlooked as someone who is not white, or blah, blah, blah. I'm not going into identity politics too much. I do think people need to be based more on merit than where they come from. But I think she's proven herself. Whether you like her track record is another matter. I know she's done some questionable things towards crime and prosecution, but I do differ with you a little bit there, to be honest. I appreciate your point, though. It's obviously going to be, I think, Lavrov, as a serious diplomat, is going to be looking at this like and sort of laughing his head off, probably. I mean, we also don't know who would be surrounding her in State Department. We don't know who her Secretary of Defense would be. There's a lot of unknowns here. So, maybe we can reconvene, as potentially wins, and we can reassess. But, on the face of it, I appreciate some of what you said. I differ on other things. But that's why we're here to talk about it. The other thing, as for China and the rest, we talk about China almost every time on this channel, on this show, and for me, the two main base camps of China. It's either they want to restructure the international system, completely redefine it, and make their own world order led by them, or they want to reform it. They simply want to live in coexistence, not necessarily expecting that they can't have their way, but they sort of want to, they want to control the Southeast Asia. They are by default the only power that exists there. And then you've got these two poles of America and China, but they deal, right? And the best example I can think of this is, we've chatted about it before, but the strategic partnership that Russia signed with North Korea and Vietnam, but Vietnam's less of a dynamic one. The point I'm getting at to here is that the Chinese were quite quiet about that partnership with the North Koreans because they don't really want it. The Chinese don't want two reckless, well, maybe in their minds, disruptive powers that are affecting potential trade flows between them and the West. Whether or not you agree with it, or not you personally, but people listening, watching, China is heavily engaged in well, integrated with Western economies, and they don't want an incoming president, be it Trump or Harris, to slap on some more sanctions, and they may well do that, or they may slap on some more tariffs. Trump wants to raise EV tariffs to 200%, not 100%, which they were done a couple of months ago. So China's wary of this. They do have an ailing economy. Is the West perfect? No, but this is just a realism that the Chinese are facing some challenges, and I do question how much they this long-term relationship they have with the Russians is tenable. Because look at the Arctic, what the Russians are doing up there, what the Chinese are doing up there. Look at Manchuria and that map by the Chinese that came out a year ago, and they claim that little bit of Russia, and the Russians basically said nothing about it. Look at the Siberian transatlantic pipeline, the next one, right, that they're trying to establish. The Chinese we want to pay this much, and the Russians we kind of know that we need more than that or whatever. So there's a lot of limitations here, but I definitely agree with you that they have this common ideology and sort of desire of reframing. But anyway, maybe we should just have a much more informal banter back and forth about Russia, China, great power politics with some wine or whiskey or something. I need a cigar and a buttonholed armchair here, maybe a top hat. I don't know.
Can we do this? Can we do this on your channel? Can we come with? Can we pour out and talk? Because that would just make it a hell of a lot more interesting.
Yeah. But there is one last thing I want to ask you, which is very quickly. I know we need to end, but VP for Harris. I thought it was Josh Shapiro potentially, but there's Cheryl in the comments is very keen on Mark Kelly. Thank you for reminding me. That's the name of the former astronaut. He's also he's the governor of a very important other swing state or potential swing state, right? Any thoughts on how that might influence Russia approach? Or it doesn't really matter, the VP.
As far as Russia's concerned, I don't see it. That's more of an internal matter.
Okay, interesting.
That's how it's.
We're good. Well,
but
I
will say this. I will say this. I will say this.
Any closing remarks?
Yeah. Knowing now that she is all but the nominee, right? She has the delegates. She's basically, the convention will coronate her as such. Yes, I do agree with you on the idea that if she is now the presidential candidate, she will have access to, she will be surrounded by, the political intellectual elites who will inform her more so on current policies, right? As vice president, you have, certain things to do and certain things to worry about. As presidential candidate, you are going to be informed a lot more about what is happening. So, as I said, my initial gut reaction for her is I don't think much, but U.S. history has a pattern of nominating people who basically just come from, wherever, and end up becoming influential in their own rights. So, I could be wrong, right? I could be wrong. But right now, as I said, it makes sense for her to just kind of be like the one that's influenced from behind the scenes. But that is not to say at all that she will not have any of her own thoughts and ideas after being properly informed and filled in on what's going on. So yeah, I think we're on basically the same page.
Indeed. No, good discussion, Michael. Everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the conversation, then do drop the video a like if you're on YouTube. If you are not on YouTube, then go and subscribe on YouTube if you like. I'm testing out StreamYard because I mainly use another app called Riverside for my podcast, but streams are fun. And I love interacting with you guys. And you do give me lots of good comments and hold me accountable. If you want to follow Michael, he's available at Michael Rossi Poli-Sci on X. And if you want to follow him on YouTube, then you can find him at the same handle as well. And if you want to follow me, well, you can. It's called the Global Gambit. And since you're watching this on my X account as well, I'm assuming that you already know where I am. But if you want to follow me, you can find me under my name. All right, guys. But yeah, how do I change? I'll view tab. All right. How do I change tabs? I'm not very good at this, but anyway, we'll figure it out in the next session better. But anyway, everyone, wish you peace of mind. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you all in the next one. All right, take care. Oh, I'm still here. All right. See you later, guys. I told you there'd be a mistake. See you later.